The Amstrad CPC was my first computer. It's where I cut my young teeth on video gaming in the 1980s. I have a great fondness for that underdog 8-bit computer, so I often support a project that has anything to do with it, be it games, books or magazines. I actually acquired the A-Z of Amstrad Games book a while ago, along with the other 2 volumes, yes, 3 volumes in all, but only recently read them. To say I'm a tad disappointed with the book would be an understatement. And here we are. The A-Z of Amstrad Games Volume 1. By Kieran Hawken. But before we take a look inside the book, just who is Kieran Hawken, aka The Laird, aka Atari Man, aka Kizza, aka Molerat? The blurb on Google Books states,
Kieran Hawken has been writing about video games for over 10 years, working for publications and websites such as Retro, Pixel Nation, Atari User, What Culture, Hey Poor Player, GameSpew, Retro Fusion, and the award-winning Retro Gamer magazine.
Well, with credentials like these, this book should be the definitive publication on all things Amstrad Games related. Right? Okay. The A-Z of Amstrad Games Volume 1. It's actually a pretty decent cover. A nice idea of using the Amstrad tape deck as the background. But I am getting serious deja vu. This is a mock-up of an abandoned CPC book by Retro Revival, aka Simon, from back in 2008. A very similar concept, but, of course, it could be a massive coincidence. A big co-winky-dink. 193 pages for an A-Z of Amstrad Games? That's a strange and odd-numbered publication. The contents list takes up 4 pages. I'm not even kidding here. 4 pages to list the contents of a 193-page book. Strangely, the book seems to be separated by letter pages, which have been indexed on their own. What is the point of this 4-page contents list? It's not even alphabetical. Someone will probably say,
"Oh, it's handy to see where a game is, and you can jump to that page."
Really? Oh, well, let's try that, shall we? Let's jump to Ghostbusters, page 44. Oh, no. This isn't Ghostbusters. FA Cup football? So we're stuck at page, God knows, there are no page numbers either. What page was the contents again? Well, one of the contents pages anyway. There are no internal links or bookmarks to navigate around here. We'll have to manually scroll up and down. This amounts to 4 pages of wasted space. Why create a PDF book with no proper bookmarks or internal links to move around the pages? It appears that the book was created for physical printing, and to hell with any PDF interactivity. The book's introduction. Here, we get a brief summary of Amstrad. How the company started and how it went into the computing industry. Nothing out of the ordinary here. There are a couple of niggles in the intro though. A very familiar image of the Amstrad CPC 464 here. Wikipedia can be our best friend at times for sourcing info and images, however, these images require attribution and appropriate credit when using them. No sign of any kind of credit or thanks for using this image. Oops. Amstrad didn't look at the booming computer market in 1984. It was as early as 1982 when Amstrad took an interest in the computing market. Development of the Amstrad CPC 464 began in early 1983, with the announcement in April 1984, and launch in June 1984. Here, we get the first instance of the term CPC Plus. The CPC abbreviation was dropped from the new computer names, and were launched as the 464 Plus and 6128 Plus. The Amstrad 6128 Plus image seems to have been copied from an online source as well. Again, no credit for this image. But I won't dwell on the intro for too long. There is too much to cover in the book itself. On to the games. Capital A. Well, here it is. A. The contents pages weren't lying. Here is A. Strange to waste an entire page for the letter A. We know Afterburner starts with an A. You don't need to tell us this fact by having the preceding page a blank white page with the letter A in the middle. Speaking of Afterburner, let's take a look at the Afterburner review. The layout, one long binge of text, leaves a lot to be desired. And this is a common theme throughout this book.
But what is a paragraph?
You might well say. Well, according to a well-known online encyclopedia,
A paragraph is a self-contained unit of discourse in writing dealing with a particular point or idea. A paragraph consists of one or more sentences, though not required by the syntax of any language. Paragraphs are usually an expected part of formal writing, used to organize longer prose.
In layman's terms, this means that each paragraph should focus on one subject, with different subjects separated into a different paragraph. For example, in the Afterburner review we have an introduction about the game's background, then we move on to the gameplay, and finally the critical analysis. These are three different subjects within the review. With that little lesson out of the way, now on to the review itself, where Kieran starts off with a bang.
I am sure I don't need to tell you.
But he then goes on and tells the reader anyway.
There really isn't that much to it.
Continues Kieran as he stumbles over his confusion with the three twos. I think he needs a reminder of the three twos, 2, 2, 2.
Although the actual gameplay is pretty tedious, after a while it is fun in short blasts.
A lack of comma here to clarify the writer's thoughts make this sentence ambiguous. This could be taken either as,
although the actual gameplay is pretty tedious, after a while, it is fun in short bursts.
or,
although the actual gameplay is pretty tedious, after a while it is fun in short bursts.
The review's solitary screenshot is snipped from the YouTube, Amstrad CPC, Afterburner long play video by Zypho at the 3 minutes and 34 seconds mark. While the text itself is copied and pasted from Kieran's own A-Z of Spectrum Games book.
Essentially the game is just a rip-off of Atari's hugely popular Super Sprint arcade game.
Writes the infamously self-proclaimed Atari fan. First off, writers should never flat out state that a developer is ripping another developer off. Terms like influenced by or clone are acceptable. And the rip-off part just doesn't flow well. A rephrasing would be needed either way. Does the Kizzer not read through any of this stuff at all?
Unlike Super Sprint though, which featured 4 players.
Though, should be separated in this sentence by commas on either end. Also games, plot and gameplay elements, should be written in present tense, not past tense. It should read,
Unlike Super Sprint though, which features 4 players.
These are simple style formatting that should be laid out in the publisher's house style guide. For those who don't know, see what I did there.
A style guide or manual of style is a set of standards for the writing, formatting and design of documents. It is often called a style sheet, although the term also has other meanings. The standards can be applied either for general use, or be required usage for an individual publication, or a particular organization, or a specific field. A style guide establishes standard style requirements to improve communication by ensuring consistency both within a document, and across multiple documents. Because practices vary, a style guide may set out standards to be used in areas such as punctuation, capitalization, citing sources, formatting of numbers and dates, table appearance and other areas.
I find it astonishing that a 30-year veteran of the retro gaming writing community hasn't adhered themselves to a house style guide for any of their 50-odd publications. Anyway, onwards.
Probably not, but that doesn't really matter. This cost a damn sight less.
Here we get a common mistake we will see in this book, the comma splice, aka comma error. This kind of loose punctuation is discouraged in formal writing and is easily fixed by adding because, as, or replacing the comma with a semicolon. Oh, and the general consensus is that BMX Simulator was released on the Amstrad CPC in 1987, not 1986. The Atari man borrowed the screenshot from the YouTube video BMX Simulator for the Amstrad CPC by Kediger at the 1 minute and 17 seconds mark.
Without doubt Chase HQ was one of my favorite arcade games of the late 80s.
Writes the veteran journalist. Besides the missing comma, when writing dates down, it is 80s, spelt out, or 80s, the decade in number format with an apostrophe prefix, no apostrophe between the 0 and S. A house style guide would state basic things like this.
The idea of the game is get behind the wheel.
You wonder if Kizzer is really an accomplished writer, as he says he is, when he makes rookie mistakes such as omitting entire words from sentences, misses it in the proofread, and misses it during the copy and paste from his original Spectrum book.
You are hot in pursuit of a wanted criminal.
Another layered classic. I find it hard to believe Kizza would ever find himself hot in pursuit of anything, considering everything he does seems to be copied from someone else. The phrase he is thinking of is undoubtedly
in hot pursuit.
Amazing digitized speech.
The amazing digital speech is only in the 128K version. No doubt, the laird watched a YouTube video and noticed the speech but did not realize it was the 128K version. For some unfathomable reason, the from the title is pushed to the end and in brackets. Does the laird think that the reader would be confused by seeing The Empire Strikes Back in the E section? The first lengthy paragraph is mental gymnastics at Kizza's finest.
Released in 1985, The Empire Strikes Back is not just the third film in the original Star Wars trilogy, it is also the third game in the Atari arcade game trilogy. It was originally released as an upgrade kit for Star Wars and then as a standalone game, so as you can probably guess, it has far more in common with the original game than the second.
Not only is this spaghetti junction of writing confusing, it gets simple facts incorrect. It is also a copy editor's nightmare. What do you do with this? This would be punted back for a complete rewrite.
It's still well worth owning, however. 8 out of 10.
While the game wasn't exactly received well by the magazines of the time, Amstrad Action gave the game 51%.
The problems with Empire are that it has poor design, not enough stages, is too easy, and occasionally crashes. Save your energy for a more intellectual pastime, like fly swatting.
Amstrad computer user also heaped criticism on the game.
Unfortunately, the main force in this game is that of boredom. After completing one level, it's straight back to the same old thing. Nice graphics, great tune, lousy gameplay.
The classic.
For those that might not know.
How I have missed thee.
But it perhaps rather surprising.
Oopsie doodle, as Ned Flanders would say, we have missed another word.
One you when you progress straight to the next stage.
How many errors can you get in one line? Who knows, but Kizza is working like a hawk to break every record. It looks like Kieran has been stalking Zypho's YouTube videos again, as the screenshot here was grabbed from his Amstrad CPC Flash Gordon review and long play from the 5 minutes and 51 seconds mark. Kizza is always a bit loose with his release dates, but this one takes the biscuit. 1983? The Amstrad CPC 464 wasn't unveiled to the public until April 1984. Astonishing stuff.
While Haunted Hedges didn't quite turn out to be the tour de force I hoped for, it remained a favorite of mine right up until the day I traded my Spectrum in for an Atari ST.
That's strange. What has the Amstrad game Haunted Hedges got to do with his trading in his Spectrum? Or when you realize that this text is copied over from his Spectrum book, it is not quite so strange after all. Plenty of other niggles in here too, including a comma splice, missing commas, and a missing word.
It's also a game that holds a great deal of nostalgia for me, so the following rating might just be a little bit biased.
You don't say.
8 out of 10.
Amstrad Action covered the game in their roundup of games in issue 1, giving the game a rating of 43%. It also fared no better in a similar roundup in Amtix issue 2, receiving a 47% rating. Both reviews stating how the game is boring and unoriginal.
Super Off-Road was also endorsed by some bloke called Ivan Iron Man Stewart.
Writes the consummate professional. As professional as writing.
I got my literacy skills from some bloke down the pub,
whose image adorned all the home computer versions of the game.
Continues the bedazzling Mr. Hawken. It looks like it is time for another English lesson, whose versus whose. Here is a good teaching aid from the website myenglishteacher.eu.
Whose is the contraction for who, and is. Example, who's the person in charge of proofreading this book? Whose is used to show possession. Example, whose books are these that have been left all over the internet without being proofread?
Not the one to be flustered, Kieran continues.
In many ways, Super Off-Road is a spiritual successor to Atari's Super Sprint. Like that title, this is a 4-player racing game with a kind of forced isometric perspective, so you see all the track, as if from above, but the trucks are viewed side on.
a very clear-cut example of a comma splice, again, and the love affair with all things Atari continues.
It features many of the same gameplay principles as Atari's iconic game, including power-ups, money, up to multiplayer gameplay and race ceremonies too.
Up to multiplayer gameplay? What does that even mean? I could write a book just about these fantastic Hawkeye phrases.
The biggest downfall of Super Off-Road is that once you have got your vehicle up to spec, it's incredibly easy to win each race, meaning you might get a bit bored of it as the challenge wanes.
Besides the missing apostrophe in "it's," there is also a missing comma before meaning. Time for another teacher lesson, twice in the same review, record-breaking stuff.
It's versus it's. It's belonging to it. Example, the publisher fired its proofreader just before the A-Z of Amstrad Games book was submitted. It is, it has. Example, it's not very good at all, it's been written pretty shoddily.
As expected from a Kieran researched article, we have some loose facts presented to us again.
Matthew Smith's hugely popular sequel to Manic Miner sold in the millions and became the stuff of legend when it was featured in the superb BBC docudrama The Micromen.
First off, it's Micromen with no prefix "off", the, and secondly, there is some inconsistency with the italics formatting. For those that don't know, games, films, and book titles are formatted in italics. And lastly, it is laughable to suggest that Micromen, a one-off drama show released in 2009, was responsible for the success of Jet Set Willy in 1984 by showing a 2-second clip of the game.
But mess isn't the only thing still lurking in the many rooms. So of the more crazy drunken guests are there too and must be avoided all costs.
So of the more drunken guests are there too. I have read and reread this sentence, but I still can't make any sense of it. And we round off the review with a fine blunder.
This CPC port of Jet Set Willy is every bit as good as the ZX Spectrum original and remains an all-time classic.
An all-time classic. I didn't know Mario Guest wrote this review. The screenshot can be traced back to the YouTube video by Meta81 at the 10-minute 46 seconds mark. Well, another great start with the release date. Loops is logged on both CPC Rouleurs and CPC Power as having a 1991 release date. It was also reviewed by Amstrad Action and Amstrad Computer User in April 1991 and May 1991, respectively. Anyway, the hawk begins.
After a comprehensive options screen, including difficulty mode, game type, and even a choice of music, it's straight into the action.
Oh, no. Do I need to go over the its versus its lesson? The retro gaming wordsmith continues.
Sometimes you have no choice but to cost yourself this valuable time though, as you can't place the piece it gives you.
What? No choice but to cost yourself this valuable time? I really wonder whether we are going for an error in every sentence here.
Every now and again, you will get a little Pac-Man character, who is able to munch up an incomplete loop from the screen for you to give you more space.
Literacy gymnastics at its finest. Once again, we get off to a blinding start.
Milk Race is without doubt one of my most loved titles from Mastertronic's vast budget range.
Of my most loved titles. Some more Hawkenerisms.
I am not really sure why, but I spent many hours playing this Spectrum version as a nipper.
And why is Hawkeye writing about the Spectrum version again? Rhetorical question.
You ride a bike horizontally across the screen racing through the 13 different towns that make up the tour.
You ride a bike horizontally across the screen. You ride a bike horizontally across the screen racing through the 13 different towns. I couldn't have put that more awkwardly if I tried. If you haven't heard of Quick Draw McGraw, then Kieran is here to explain in simple terms what it is about.
One of the first things you will notice about it is that, quite similar to many arcade games, without directly copying any single game in particular, this is down to the way the game is designed.
Not only is this sentence a logistical nightmare to read, but it doesn't tell us anything.
Quick Draw himself has an energy bar that depletes when you are hit. If it does run out, then it's game over.
Sigh. Some more its versus its needed.
It's not so good in the audio department though, sadly, with just a few basic sound effects, and that's it. Quick Draw McGraw is never going to set the world alight or win any awards for its originality, but it's definitely good clean fun.
Bloody hell. A missing full stop, and missing comma, all in one go. If you get a sense of deja vu when looking at the screenshot, then perhaps you have watched Zypher's Quick Draw McGraw long play and review video where Kieran snipped the image from the 2 minutes and 29 seconds mark.
Gremlin didn't give a great deal of support to Amstrad's failed GX4000 console, but they did choose to publish one of their biggest hits of the time on the machine, to the delight of all GX4000 and CPC Plus owners everywhere.
Again, Kieran, who would have us believe has a retro gaming encyclopedic memory, has mistakenly stated that the Amstrad Plus computers are CPC Plus. For Kieran, who doesn't know, the enhanced Amstrad computers that launched in 1990 were not called CPC Plus, but just the Amstrad Plus series, the Amstrad 464 Plus and Amstrad 6128 Plus. The man they call Mole Rat goes on.
Unlike many other games of its type, Switchblade doesn't scroll. You simply progress from one screen to the next. This seems a bit unnatural at first, but you soon get used to it.
Progress from one screen to the next? Like a flick screen game, which has been a thing for at least a decade before Switchblade turned up. Unnatural? What, like Prince of Persia or Flashback?
The main upgrade here from the original CPC release is in the color, making the game much closer to the 16-bit original.
Why let facts get in the way of an illiterate sentence? The Plus version was actually released first, with the standard CPC version appearing several months later.
We also have some simply incredible music from the legend that is Mr. Ben Daglish. It might even be my favorite tune in any Amstrad game! Exclamation mark.
There is no period needed after Mr., unless you're using a US-based house style guide, but you're not using any house style guide at all, are you, Mr. Hawken? Oh, and an obvious comma splice in the midst of that. What's this? Thrust with a release date of 1989. That is a doozy of a slip. Thrust was released on the Amstrad CPC in 1986, a remarkable 3 years earlier than stated here.
It's funny how sometimes the clones are remembered better than the games they are actually based upon.
Like what? What clone games are better remembered than the original game, Kieran? Don't leave us hanging this way. But no time to dwell on such missteps as we're quickly on to the next one, or two.
This is definitely true in the case of Thrust, originally released for the BBC Micro in 1986. It is pretty much just a rip-off of Atari's 1982 vector arcade game Gravita.
Another comma splice and the reappearance of that odd phrase rip-off of. Bizarre. And proof that Kizza just seems to churn out 10 books a day without reading any of it back. And some more fanboy love for Atari. Is this book about Amstrad Games, or Atari? Or Spectrum? As for the critical comments, why write about a game that you don't like but is universally liked by the scene? Thrust is one of the best received games of the time. Amstrad Action gave the game 94%.
Excellent vector graphics, well designed, devious caverns, marvelous ship control, great effects, simple yet so addictive.
All three reviewers for Amstrad Computer User gave the game 19 out of 20, with comments such as,
"Anything which keeps me playing at 4 in the morning has to be good."
Amtix awarded Thrust 86% with a highlight comment being,
"Overall, a simple but addictive game."
Computing with the Amstrad gave a perfect 10 out of 10, stating,
Thrust has got what it takes to become a classic computer game, inherent simplicity combined with handsome rewards for the skillful player.
So, again, the question is raised. Why cover a game in your book just to slag it off? In a book with limited space that should be showcasing the best games from a computer's catalog? Is this trolling? Is this whole book one big troll? Kieran, are you trolling us? The king of rambling is at it again here with a mass of superfluous waffle. With the Uchi Mata review we get the obligatory, "You probably haven't heard of him but," and then goes on to fill half of this write-up with an over-explanation of who Brian Jacks is. Bloody hell, there is no need to retell his life story, just give us the gist of who he is and move on. don't quite know what happened here.
You will require quite a lot of patience to play this, as it takes some turn to learn how to execute all the moves and use them correctly.
It takes some turn to learn. That's an unusual turn of phrase. Well, it is the Hawken after all. Can't say I had heard of Achimata, but Kieran thought this 5 out of 10 rated game was deserving of coverage in this book. Oops, Aliens, which is a film, should be in italics. There are lots of past tense prose here. I am sure I have explained this, but for those who don't know, plots for games should be written in present tense. The write-up is a bit of a mess here, really. Commas missing, comma splices. Again. Wow, 9 out of 10. This must be a belter of a game. Oh. And the screenshot is pulled from the YouTube video by Macadam Retro Gaming at the 1 minute and 37 seconds mark. And that's about it, regarding the game's coverage in the book anyway. Here we have a few plugs for Kieran's other books. The A to Z of ZX Spectrum Games. Check out the source material for this Amstrad book right here. Literally. The same text, give or take a few words changed here or there, can be found in these books. And similarly produced efforts with the Atari ST and ColecoVision. Of course, we couldn't cover all the errors that are in this book, but here are some of the more amusing ones.
But there is far more to than that. Imminent. They lose, do lose. Could have, and should have. Your biggest hazard is the cars and trucks. When you get to the river, you must jump onto the moving log. Underrated. You must first solve a multitude of puzzles, mostly object-driven, in order to progress. Perfect timing is required if you don't want to kill doing it. Power-ups that greatly improve his strength. This specky version controls about as well as it could without the custom trackball of its arcade parent. The main complaint of gamers was the slow speed of the home ports, and the Spectrum conversion of this classic road racer is no exception.
And a quick run through of those classic Hawken introduction phrases.
For those of you who might not be familiar with the concept. For those that might not know. For those who have been living under a rock and somehow don't know. For those that don't know. For those that haven't already worked it out. For those that don't know. For those that don't know. For those that don't know.
Looking back over the pages, there are more red markings in this book than a teacher highlighting a naughty schoolboy's homework. When acquiring a book, people expect a decent standard of content, especially when paying for it. This book would be called out even if it was free. Good punctuation and bad punctuation can be the difference between knowing your shit and knowing your shit. And you just can't copy from Wikipedia, YouTube, and the likes, and pass it off as your own work. That's plagiarism, theft, and shouldn't be tolerated. As for copying your own work to pad out 50+ retro gaming books, I have no words adequate enough for this dodgy shenanigans. Looking into this author a little more, it seems that time has caught up with Kieran, as he has recently been exposed as the retro gaming charlatan that he is, and these books, over 50 and counting, just cement the tarring that he is receiving these days. It's astonishing that his work has been published in various titles, and more so for Retro Gamer, an actual bona fide commercial, newsagent-worthy title. This book doesn't even have the basics done right, no headers, no footers, no page numbering. For some reason, there is a blank page for every letter. There are large blank spaces in every review. There is only one screenshot per review, which are copied from YouTube videos. The text is copied from other sources, most notably Kieran's Spectrum books. The writing is atrocious, and is full of spelling errors, grammar errors, punctuation errors, formatting errors, style guide errors, and factual errors. As for the games chosen for this book, we have some real odd choices. And, yes, before I list games that have been excluded here, I have also checked against volumes 2 and 3. And where is the number section? No room for the likes of 10th Frame, 1942, or 3D Starfighter. Instead of Get Dexter or Greiser, both considered CPC greats of all time, we get Grange Hill, which isn't remembered or rated well by anyone, including Kieran, who gave it 4 out of 10. I don't believe anyone thinks of the CPC when it comes to Kick-Off, and another 4 out of 10 rating emphasizes that. so I include it in a book highlighting the best and famous Amstrad games. The L section features LED Storm and The Legend of Cage. Both are pretty forgettable games, with 7 out of 10 and 6 out of 10 ratings respectively. No Laser Squad or Lords of Midnight here. Instead of Mega Blasters, Mortville Manor, Marsport, or Match Day 2, we get Mind Trap and Milk Race. Yes, those well-received and unforgettable Amstrad classics. Not a penny more, not a penny less, which Kieran gave 3 out of 10 is featured ahead of Nebulous. Q is probably the hardest letter to find 3 decent games for, and the selection here shows that. Quick Draw McGraw, A Question of Sport, and Quartet. T is an interesting section, as you would think that there would be plenty of games to fill up this section, but Mr. Hawken proves us wrong yet again. We get Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles, Thunderblade, and Thrust. The latter included to highlight Hawken's bias against an otherwise well-received game. We could have had Tau Ceti, Tranta, or Turrican. Hawken even has the face to include an obscure platform game, his words, from the cover tape of a magazine. He then gave Iris a 5 out of 10. So the question is, why feature average games that no one has heard of, when there are so many classics missing? There was also no room for the likes of La Badia del Crimen, BAT, Barbarian, The Ultimate Warrior, Bruce Lee, Captain Blood, Driller, M.N. Hughes International Soccer, Fluff, The Guild of Thieves, Highway Encounter, Iron Lord, Orion Prime, The Pawn, Prehistoric 2, Prince of Persia, Purple Saturn Day, Rick Dangerous 2, Robocop 2, The Sacred Armor of Antiriad, Savage, Sorcery, Spinderzy, Stormlord, Super Cauldron, or Werewolves of London. How could Kieran have made this book better? With over 50 books out in the wild, covering every retro gaming system, and featuring the same copy-paste formula, I think the boat has sailed with regards to fixing future editions. However, by following simple steps, this could have been a success. It would have been better going for a best-of style book, rather than 3 games per letter. And if that means that the majority of games start with R, and are released in 1989, so be it. With the concept in place, produce a better design, which has the game's plot, gameplay, reception, trivia, ratings, etc. Includes images, a cover, a title screen, screenshots. Follow an editorial style guide to keep formatting consistent throughout. Get rid of the blank letter pages, and in turn, the game spreads flow better. Have proper headers and footers. Get rid of the overlong contents list and have this section on 1 or 2 pages. Spell check and proofread the work, or get someone to check it over. It's not that hard, if you are willing to put the effort in.